Hi, this is Nathan Whalen, and today I'm going to be reading from the rough draft of the third book of the Velessar Saga. Prologue. Fear coursed through the winter night. The light of the full moon reflected off of the snow, filtering through the pine needles. Aaron stood underneath the canopy of branches, shifting from left to right. Nearly there. The young man shifted, placing his weight back onto his left leg. Just a bit further. He let out a quick, quiet breath. Rubbing his hands together, Arnon slowly crept forward and pushed his way out from beneath the tree. A horrid, discordant chime rang out from the recesses of the night. No, 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 there's no way. Arnon backed up, pushing aside the branch beside him. I can't stay here. He quickly turned and froze. One of the branches on the other side of the tree was lightly swaying. There's no wind tonight. They're here. He waited, watching for any sign of movement. A frigid feeling wound its way over his neck and down his back. He shook and started backing away from the tree. His left ear twitched as warm, moist air brushed against it. You cannot run away from me. The voice softly caressed his ear. It had been hardly more than an entrancing whisper, but it felt so close. Arnon swung around, throwing a wild right hook. It swung through empty air. He put his hands up, ready for a fight, but there was only the tree branches alongside him. Harsh metallic ringing wandered through the trees towards him, like a wolf stalking its prey. He could feel the sound as it wrapped itself around different parts of the forest, slowly moving closer. Arnon looked to his left and right. He darted out from underneath the tree and into the night. Smashing through the thick snow, he ran through the clearing between the pines. A metallic clang of the chime rang out, and he felt the clashing notes pass over him. They're right behind me. Ah! Arnon yelled as something latched onto his foot. He bent down, shoving snow aside. Something gray was wrapped around his right foot. The substance looked like clay, and it was growing, slowly moving up his ankle. He stomped his foot down. The gray matter didn't fall off. Bending down, Arnon tried to rip his shoe off to no avail. The gray clay was tightly wrapped around his ankle, cinching down as he tore at it with his fingers. I can't stay out here. Hobbling, Arnon pulled his right foot through the snow. Each breath became more and more visible in the cold night. Move, move, move. He bent down, panting. It felt like whatever was on his right foot was getting heavier. Crunch. Something was right behind him. Arnon lunged forward, but his right foot was stuck to the ground. Desperately, he tried pulling it up. Come on, move! The discordant notes of the chime hit his ears. He looked up and tried to scream. Chapter 1. A dark pile of thoughtfully placed stones stood underneath the tall pines. The marker had rested in near secrecy, just a few paces off the path to the village. The small space was clear of errant branches and shrubbery, creating a small place wrapped and hidden by the forest. The isolation offered the mourner a place to escape for a moment, allowing them to step into their memory of those who had passed. Bridgett stood in the darkening woods, remembering the few happy memories she had of her parents. They had been taken away from her by a power that only a few understood when she was only 7. So much had changed in the 9 years since then. She brought up her hand to the standing stone, lightly touching its rough surface before taking her hand away. I wish I could tell you that we stopped the Whispering Wind, that justice won out in the end. I wish I was able to show you this. Bridgett made a fist with her left hand and held it out in front of her, palm up, as if she was holding something small, like a moth in her fingers. She opened up her hand, and from her palm, a small white light flashed into existence. The white light took on the shape of a sphere suspended in the air. over her palm. She let it float above her. With a light sway of her hand, the sphere of light moved above the standing stone. Bridgett brought her palms together in front of her. Slowly, she moved her palms away from each other, and the sphere split apart into 3 lines of light that continued to stretch as Bridgett's palms moved further and further from each other. The lines of light waved and coursed like thin flags moving in the wind. The white light faded into complementary shades of dark blue and green, lightly illuminating the forest. The lines of light rolled back and forth, gently swaying like a small mimicry of the northern lights. I wish we could all watch them again. She could still remember the last time they had gone out to see the northern lights. She had been awoken by her mother's gentle hands, lightly shaking her awake. By the light of a thin, small candle, she looked into her mother's dark brown eyes. Sliding out of bed, Bridgett stood as her mother gently layered her up with coats and blankets. Taking her hand, they left the small wooden house and entered the cold winter night. Her father was already standing outside. She remembered his thick red beard and heavy freckles that dotted his face. He turned and a smile touched his face as he saw them. "Look, look!" 6-year-old Bridgett had exclaimed. "It's the lights!" "Yes, the northern lights are very bright tonight," her mom had said, the smile evident underneath her thick winter mask. Her dad walked over and picked her up, holding her with one arm close to him. Her mom found a spot next to her, and they spent the next several minutes watching the natural wonder that was the northern lights. She could always remember the love and warmth she felt in that moment, enveloped by her parents' embrace. Bridgett was brought out of the moment as the lights faded. She looked up to see the winter day slowly coming to an end as the forest dipped faster and faster into darkness. Blinking, she pulled her left hand out of her mitten and wiped her eyes. Grandma had always affectionately mentioned that she had gotten her left-handed predisposition from her father and her dark brown hair and eyes from her mother. She waited a moment longer, staring at the pile of stones, each placed by different members of the village in remembrance of her parents. Turning, she left the small space and back onto the path that cut its way through the forest. While there was no substantial change in the forest in just those few paces, it felt like she had stepped out from a place where the past still lived and back into the present. She walked briskly along the forest path as it wound its way back towards the small village of Levlevik. Leafless maples stood somberly aside the pines on either side of the well-worn and pruned walkway. It was not long before it opened up right next to 2 small, humble homes. Both had old, slanted thatched roofs that rested upon worn wooden siding. Surrounded them was a fence made of posts with wooden tree branches woven between them. She strode down the familiar dirt path between the houses to the center of the small circular village. Each of the old buildings had been built facing inwards, creating a barrier to the wind that blew in from the sea. In the small clearing in the center of the village, a few people moved about, moving supplies and tools inside. Bridgett waved at Kristjun and Detta, and the older couple waved back in kind as she passed by. The longhouse, a sturdy fixture of the village, stood waiting for her to return. With a distinctive creak, she pulled the door open. Quickly stepping inside, Bridgett turned to close the door against the cold. She turned back as the delicious scent of lamb wafted through the air, catching her attention with its subtle promise of a delicious supper. She took her boots off and got into her warm slippers. Quickly rounding the corner, she moved into the dining room of the longhouse. A large table ran the length of the main room, an open invitation for the rest of the villagers to gather and discuss events. Her friend and mentor Aurelia stood by the fireplace, dark brown eyes staring deep into the moving flames. Even though she was tending to the stew, her athletic form couldn't bring itself to go against years of training to stand in any other way than to be upright and ready for battle. Dark hair tumbled down, spilling just past her collarbone onto her dark dress. 2 lines of gold-colored patterns ran vertically down the black vest. Her dark shirt and long black skirt were accented with a muted dark green. Everything she wears has to be so dark. No fun, bright colors. Ever. While the dress was very pretty, it also allowed Aurelia to blend in to a crowd in northern Velessar. Bridgett wore the same style, but with a drastically different color palette. Deep, rich, dark reds highlighted by a complementary dark blue made the dress she'd sewn stand out. There was a pattern of white light cascading and encompassing the bottom of her skirt in a ring of white. Where Aurelia had gold patterns on her vest, Bridgett had a few white flowers as adornments. The rest of the villagers had no idea that these white patterns were the blatant embodiments of her usage of the light arts. "Hey," Bridgett said, moving over to Aurelia. She took off her gloves, tossing them onto the long wooden table, and held out her hands towards the fire. "Hey," Aurelia said, looking over. She pushed some of her black hair back away from her face. Aurelia had been staying on and off again in the longhouse with Bridgett, her grandmother, and Jay for the last 4 years after they had returned from the Raywithian Empire. She was an assassin by trade and a powerful caster of the fire arts. In her upper 20s, she carried herself with confidence and grace from a lifetime of training. This combination had enticed and enthralled one of the men in the town to attempt to win her heart. "I'm excited for supper. It smells so good. I better get some before Goodmundr eats all of it," Bridgett said. "He's not coming over tonight," Aurelia said slowly. Bridgett looked up at Aurelia. "Oh, is he busy with something?" "No," Aurelia said. Silence hung in the air. Did something happen between her and Goodmundr? He was a brute of a man, built like a mountain and just as weathered by the elements as one. While he wasn't the smartest, his heart was in the right place, and Bridgett didn't think he'd do something to knowingly hurt Aurelia's feelings. Bridgett studied her friend's face, hoping to figure out what was going on. It doesn't sound like they broke up. Maybe they had a bad argument. "Oh," Bridgett said, rubbing her hands together. "Do you want to talk about it?" "No, not right now. Maybe after supper," Aurelia said, in an unfamiliar, despondent tone. "You can't just leave me in suspense like this," Bridgett said. Aurelia's face twitched in a small hint of a smile. "Yes, wouldn't want to keep my romance counselor out of the loop. Never mind the fact that she hasn't been in a relationship," she added with a playful tease. "Oh, please, where would you be without my stellar advice?" Bridgett said with a grin, lightly placing her warmed hand on Aurelia's arm. "Probably in the same spot, but I'd like to think I've contributed." "Definitely, don't count yourself out," Aurelia said. "It'll be fun when you find someone, and it'll be my turn to tease you. Besides, wasn't it you who was telling me that your parents met when they both turned 16? Could be the same thing for you. Soon the counselor will get a dose of her own medicine." "Bridgett!" Hilda, Bridgett's grandmother, called out, her weary and wizened voice carrying down the hallway. "Is supper almost ready?" "Almost, Grandma," Bridgett called back. "Let me check," Aurelia said. With a twist of Aurelia's hand, the flames in the fireplace bent away from the pot. Bridgett felt the small stir of power from the arts move through the air from her mentor, washing over her like small invisible waves. Aurelia stirred the contents of the stew with a long wooden spoon and brought it up for a quick taste test. "Just right," Aurelia said, setting the spoon down on her wooden plate. "Grandma, supper's ready," Bridgett called out. "Do you need help up?" "No, I'm fine. Be there in a minute." Hilda's voice wound its way down the hallway. Bridgett looked over the hallway as loud thumping footsteps approached her. A moment later, the door to the hallway swung open, and Jay rushed into the room, always ready to eat more. Jay was a strange boy around her age, somewhere around 16, who had arrived at the village 4 years ago without nearly any memory of his past. They had taken him in after rescuing Ernest, the lighthouse keeper, from the followers of the Whispering Wind. With messy dark brown hair, working pants, and a wool sweater that Bridgett was surprised wasn't put on backwards or inside out, Jay fit in well with the rest of the fellow villagers. The door to the hallway opened again and Hilda slowly walked into the room. Her grandmother moved to sit near the fireplace, and Jay brought her a heavy blanket to wrap herself in. She hadn't been the same since last summer. Bridgett had found her grandmother on the floor of the longhouse, unable to pick herself up. After the fall, her grandma had been staying mostly indoors, confined to a rocking chair. It was hard watching as her grandmother struggled with the basics like cooking, slowly being able to do less and less for herself. While Hilda's thoughts were not as clear as they had been, glimpses of who her grandma was were still there behind the confusion. Bridgett dished up some of the warm broth of potatoes, carrots, and tender lamb for grandma before helping herself to some. She sat down and watched as Jay dished himself up a generous helping. He's definitely hitting a growth spurt. In the 4 years since he had shown up, he had changed a lot. From the young boy who didn't remember where he had come from, to a sturdy fixture of the village, he'd thrown himself into training and working with Caden and Goodmunder. I really need to find out what happened between Aurelia and Goodmunder. Though, I'm still a bit surprised their relationship happened to begin with. Well, maybe not. An image of Goodmunder in the river pulling up his crawdad traps came to mind. Like a cliff face, his shirtless torso was chiseled and outlined with muscles from long hours of labor. No. Stop that. She shook her head, purging the thought. Bridgett, is everything all right? Hilda asked, her frail voice filled with concern. Yeah, everything's fine, Bridgett responded. Don't mind me, Grandma. I'm just thinking about Aurelia's boyfriend. Nothing weird here. Oh, okay, Hilda said. She started scooping up another bite, but paused, setting down the large spoon. I was meaning to tell you that merchant that's in town. What's his name? I thought you said his name was Jax, or something like that, Jay said. No, that's not it. Hilda's brow furrowed in thought. Johann. That's it. It was Johann, Hilda said. Pretty close, Jay said, shoving more food into his mouth. Not even, Bridgett replied. What were you saying about him, Grandma? Oh, Johann was telling me about a young girl with some strange sway over the land, able to shape rocks and stones without a chisel. Grandma, do you think it's another wielder of the arts? Yes, I do. While that merchant was strange, he didn't seem like the type to lie. Hilda paused, squinting at the food in front of her. I've met someone... I know I knew someone a long time ago with a similar style of art. Oh, you've never mentioned meeting another arts user, Bridgett said. While her grandmother couldn't use the arts, she could channel some other power, something that felt older than the arts themselves. Through her music, she could do things that Bridgett nor Aurelia could explain. A dark look covered Hilda's face. It was a long time ago. Things didn't end well. What type of... Bridgett started. I don't want to talk about it. It's not a pleasant memory, Hilda said, dismissing the subject. Bridgett wanted to press her grandmother on the subject, but when Hilda made up her mind on something, she could be more stubborn than a mule. That might be worth checking up on, Aurelia said. Most arts casters don't go around publicizing their existence, much less their powers. She paused for a moment. Strange that someone would just come here and start telling that tale. Almost on purpose. On purpose? Jay asked. On purpose, Aurelia reiterated. It's likely that there's a sinister purpose behind this seemingly innocuous story. Here she goes, back into the world of espionage. Bridgett watched as her friend assembled a web of hidden thoughts behind her focused gaze. We could take this tale at face value, or we could take it as an invitation to investigate. Either way, it'll lead to the same group, Aurelia said, training and command entering her voice. The Havoksha, Jay said in between bites. Who? Hilda asked, looking at Jay. The Havoksha are a group of mercenary forces formed from a belief that the arts and those who use them are evil, Aurelia said. I know a few of their ranks are former high-ranking Rayrithian military personnel that have grown up with a hatred for those who use the fire arts. They're taught that it was the Firecasters that stopped the Empire from taking control of Velessar during the last war, despite the fact that the Empire actively recruited and trained those very casters and used them against Velessar. It feels like it was only yesterday that my parents were drafted to serve the army of Velessar, Hilda said. That wasn't that long ago. Mom and Dad made me stay with an aunt. She was a horrible woman. So I grabbed my knapsack one night and took off into the woods. Hilda stared at Aurelia, but her eyes were somewhere in the past. She's been talking about her parents more and more often, like they're still here with us. Jay traded looks with Bridgett, concern in his light blue eyes. I know. I want to comfort her too, but she won't understand that her parents are gone. I've seen the Havoksha hang a mother who used her water arts to put on small shows for kids. She hardly knew what she was doing, didn't even know what the term the arts meant. But it was enough for them to target her, Aurelia said. That's horrible, Hilda said. How large is this group? I have no idea. They're agile enough to move through the Empire and Velessar without being noticed, Aurelia said. Bridgett blew cold air onto the stew. That could have been me. If it wasn't for her grandmother's protection growing up, she could have shared the same fate as her parents when the Whispering Wind had taken them. What am I going to do? Just take this other arts caster away from her village, try to teach her the arts? No, if I could go back and change things for myself, I would. Especially if I had been left all alone. She looked over at her friend. Aurelia was already set on investigating this rumor. The Order would require it. What if I get ahead of her? Just this once. You're not the only one with good ideas. I want to go find this girl, Bridgett said. She might have no idea of the dangers she's in, and if the story of her powers is going around, it'll make her a target. What? Hilda asked. What if you had not been there for me? Bridgett said, putting her hand on her grandma's. Maybe this is why I can use the power of the arts. Bridgett, that's nice, but it's a dangerous world out there, Hilda said. I'd have to agree with your grandma, Aurelia said. Excuse me, Bridgett said, looking at Aurelia. You and Danger have such a close relationship that I'm surprised Gudmundur is not jealous. Oh, Aurelia gasped. Bridgett, I didn't know you could also control fire. I learned from the best. So, no other reasons to go out, Aurelia said. I really do want to go help, Bridgett said. It's time to use all this training for something more. I'm tired of just hiding this power away. It feels like putting a lit candle under a large wicker basket. Won't the basket catch fire? Jay asked. That's not the point, Jay, Bridgett said, glaring over at him. If we're hearing about this arts user, then anyone like the Havoksha will know about her. I mean, she could be okay at the moment, Jay said. He looked over at her, staring into her with his light blue eyes. It's more than just protecting her, Jay said knowingly. You want to change what happened to your past. Bridgett looked away. She knew that he'd been able to piece together what had happened to her parents, but it was strange hearing her own thoughts put so bluntly. We'll make sure the Havoksha won't find her, Aurelia said. I think it'd be good to get out of the village for a while. Besides, us girls really do need our own adventure, don't we? That sounds like a plan to me, Bridgett said, putting her mixed feelings aside. What? Jay said. Why am I being left out? You've got training to do, remember? Bridgett said. Wouldn't want to miss that. Well, yes, but... Caden, are you ready for another dueling session? Bridgett said, trying to make her voice deeper. Come on, Caden, let's duel. Bridgett, I don't have time to show. I'm trying to make another practice sword. Bridgett continued. I do not sound like that, Jay objected. Jay, you kinda do, Aurelia said. Jay paused, opening his mouth to say more. He glanced down at his food, shrugged, and continued devouring the meal. That settles it. Girls' trip it is, Aurelia said. Are you two going to be fine on your own? Maybe Caden or Goodmunder could go with you, Hilda asked. We'll be fine, Grandma, Bridgett said. Oh, I know the two of you can handle yourselves, but I just worry, Hilda said. Oh, before I forget, Hilda looked at Aurelia. When are you and Goodmunder getting married? I bet the two of you will have some wonderful children. Grandma! Bridgett exclaimed. Jake gagged, coughing mid-bite. Seriously, I'm trying to eat over here, Jay said. Though, that does explain why Goodmunder has been leaving training early. You just noticed? Bridgett asked. They've been seeing each other for a year. What a doofus. Only a year? Aurelia teased. I wasn't sure, Bridgett said. It only officially started once you told me, anyway. Look, I really don't care one way or the other. No offense, Aurelia, Jay said. None taken, Aurelia said. A slight blush hued her cheeks. It's just, that's their deal. If they're being romantic, they're being romantic. If not, Jay shrugged. Though, I'll definitely miss your food. He took another bite. Seriously? Bridgett said. Yeah, seriously. You're a great cook, Aurelia. Thanks, Jay, Aurelia said. Where is this arts user you spoke of, Hilda? Oh, right, Hilda said, putting down her spoon. They all waited, in the quiet of the crackling fire, for her answer. That strange man said it's somewhere in the northeastern region of Velessar, near the border. I don't remember the name of the town, Hilda said. Aurelia started. Let's find this merchant and get some more details. Thanks for the meal, Jay said, slowly standing. Bridgett finished up and started piling up the plates on the table. I'll clean up tonight. You and Aurelia can go find that merchant, Jay said. Thanks, Jay, Bridgett said. He wasn't doing it out of the fondness for cleaning up, but so Grandma would have someone with her. Bridgett picked up her gloves and moved to the entrance of the longhouse. She quickly donned her wool coat, thick hood, and scarf. There we go, ready for the cold. Aurelia finished fastening her coat, and they stepped outside into the near dark of winter. Lefrovic looked abandoned to the stillness of the winter. Bridgett scanned the area looking for any wagons or large merchant carts. I don't remember seeing anyone out of the ordinary today. Someone would have mentioned it. There's hardly anything out of routine that happens here. And anything new is a big deal. They went from door to door, asking about the merchant, but no one knew what they were talking about. I hope Grandma's not seeing things. She'd woken up with some crazy dreams that she had been convinced were real. One involved Jay climbing up to the top of the longhouse and being unable to climb down. She would still bring it up and vehemently warn him not to go climbing where he shouldn't. Bridgett was drawn out of her thoughts when they reached the start of the southern trail to Therese and Sven's. Bridgett, Aurelia started. I don't want to say it, But I know, Bridgett said. Grandma's memory is not what it used to be. I'm sorry, Bridgett, Aurelia said. She looked away for a moment before placing her hand on Bridget's arm. Still, let's go see Sven and Therese before heading back. Bridgett nodded. She followed Aurelia's lead down the thin winding path. The cold chill of the fall air met her exposed face, and she pulled up her scarf over her mouth. Brr, it's cold and getting really dark. I didn't bring a lantern. Well, she watched as Aurelia grabbed a branch and tore it off of the maple tree. Yeah, her favorite thing to do. From Aurelia's palm, a strand of fire moved and wrapped itself over the branch, coiling like a snake. The fire art moved and rested at the end of the branch. It was a pretty brazen use of her power, but no one seemed to catch on. Bridgett wished she could use her powers openly, to just simply light up the village with light, just like she did with the longhouse at night. Still, the villagers didn't know that Aurelia was actively using a power that brought in fire from beyond her to make torches that never went out. If they knew about my powers, I don't know what they'd do. So, you had something you wanted to talk about? Bridgett said. Right to the point, Aurelia replied. Perhaps, Bridgett said. I was wondering if you'd like to come with me on my next mission. Like, with the organization? The one you still haven't mentioned the name of, I might add, Bridgett asked. I haven't mentioned it in case the wrong people came looking. While I don't like the thought of putting Leflevique in danger, it's a very real possibility that things could go badly. Oh, Bridgett said. Still, I think that you have a lot of talent that could be used for good. I mean, Bridgett started, I think the same, but I don't know if I agree with your work. You know I don't think badly of you for what you do. You're my best friend. There's nothing that's coming between our dynamic duo. Still, I've heard of the assassinations that have been carried out. Like Baron Elphos's cup that erupted into a fiery blaze during a banquet. I'm sure it was justified. I just don't know that I could or would want to carry out justice like that. Ah, the Baron. He was selling off his vassals' winter food stores to the Raywith Empire, causing the villagers to starve for merely some more coin. He was doing what? Bridgett exclaimed. Not so loud, Aurelia said. Yes, the Baron was selling off the entire province's winter food supply for more money in his stuffed coffers. He conveniently left some for himself and his court, but the commoners' storehouses were empty when I was there last month. That has to be illegal, Bridgett said. Someone obviously told the... She stopped. She had been about to say the king, but thinking back to that filthy brat masquerading in king's clothes, she figured that someone like that wouldn't care. Exactly, Aurelia said. It's not the ideal way to go about it, but someone has to enact justice. I believe that we've been given the ability to use the arts to serve others, that it was not mere chance we can do what we do. I get what you're saying, but I'm not sure how to respond. Bridgett looked down as she walked. She cast her gaze into Aurelia's searching look. I definitely want to do more than just stay in this small village for my entire life. I just don't know if that's the best path for me. But I know you don't offer this lightly. Let me have some time to think about it. I think it'd be super awesome to travel together and explore the world. No pressure, Aurelia said. Take all the time you need. Also, yes, we need to get out and travel more. Maybe even find you someone to bring back to Leflevique, she said with a sly smile. You make me sound like Therese, Bridgett said with a grin. Everyone in Leflevique knew how Therese had gone on a mission to find someone, and within a month had Sven falling head over heels for her. You know what I should bring back? Bridgett asked. What? A new knife, Bridgett said, patting her dagger. This one is great, but it's seen its better days. Also? Also? Aurelia repeated. You know what's better than one knife? Bridgett said, watching the edges of a smile sneak over Aurelia's scarf. 2 knives. Definitely, Aurelia said. I've seen some foreign blades with a light, wavy blade design, unlike that Saix you have. Wavy? Bridgett asked. The middle of the knife from the crossguard to the point is still a straight line, but the sharp edges of the blade have been crafted in a way that lightly looks like a flame was frozen. She made a light up and down motion with her hand. You'll have to see it. They're beautiful. Yeah, you should have picked one up for me, silly, Bridgett said playfully. I'll note that down for next time, Aurelia smiled. They rounded the corner in the trail and arrived at Sven and Therese's house. The large 2-story building was fashioned in the style of the houses in the larger cities of Velessar. It was divided between the stonework of the first floor that housed some of the livestock and the wooden second floor, lightly overhanging the first, where the family lived. Their house had struck Bridgett as odd when she was a child, until she had visited some of the neighboring towns. They strode up the stairs and Aurelia knocked loudly on the thick wooden door. A moment passed before the door creaked open a pinch before being pulled back all the way. Sven stood looking at them through bleary eyes, mildly confused. Come in, it's cold out there, he said. They entered the house. Bridgett was thankful to be out of the cold. Sven and Therese's place were adorned with modest furnishings, but Therese's personal touch showed in the small decorations. What are you all doing out here at this time of night? Sven asked. He stood at an average height, barely shorter than Aurelia. Everything from the way he stood, wore, and behaved was nothing if not plain. Even his bowl haircut that had never changed was always the same. An easy man to befriend, though he was very bland. We were wondering if you happened to meet the traveling merchant that came through town today, Aurelia asked. Merchant? Was there something you desperately had to buy? Sven yawned. Aurelia and Bridgett let silence answer Sven's silly question. He stared at them blankly. It was clear to Bridgett that he was not fully awake. Sven began to say something through another yawn when his attention turned to his wife as she entered the room. This is a surprise, Bridgett. Aurelia, what's the occasion? Therese said with a warm and generous smile alighting her face. Her naturally curly, long red hair was drawn back, and she wore a long, warm robe that brushed the edges of her wool socks. A merchant, Sven said. Sven, at least invite them over to the fire. You can't just let them stay by the door. Come on, everyone, Therese said, waving them closer. Bridgett had to admit that it was nice to be out of the cold. The short walk had pronounced the deepening cold of winter. The couple's living room was small but welcoming, beckoning them all closer to the gentle fire resting in the hearth. Sven plopped down on the small 2-person couch, and Therese joined him, fitting into the spot under his arm as if it was her own custom-sewn coat. It was as if Sven had been fitted for just such a purpose. That must be nice. Merchant? Therese asked, as Bridgett found a spot on a sturdy wooden chair. The one that came through the village today, Sven said. There hasn't been anyone through Leflavik in nearly 2 weeks, Therese said. No, that can't be right. You must have seen him this morning. I talked with him in the town square, Sven said. I think I would have noticed, Therese said. Well, was this while I was speaking with Liliar, Merrill, and Thorberg? Probably, Sven yawned, looking over at her. Probably? Therese raised an eyebrow. Probably, Sven said with a goofy grin. Bridgett watched the two of them as something unspoken passed between them. He was a strange fellow, Sven said, looking back at Bridgett and Aurelia. What did he look like? Aurelia asked. He wore a dark cloak, Sven started. An image of the cultists that had kidnapped Ernest flashed to the forefront of Bridgett's mind. A dark green coat, like a woodsman's colors. I didn't see too much of his face since he had a large hood up, with a dark yellow scarf pulled up over his face. Though it matched his socks pretty well. Ah, the details you remember, Therese said. Hey, they were some nice socks, Sven replied. What did he say? Aurelia asked, leaning forward. She's doing that on purpose, trying to get him back on topic, and look like she's really invested in the conversation. A lot. I couldn't get a word in edgewise, Sven said. He kept talking about a young girl who had brought a pillar of stone out of the ground that was 2 stories tall when she was only 7. He mentioned that she had a really fine control of this power, like some stonemason would have. The whole story reminded me of something that I couldn't initially place. I thought about it for a bit, and then it hit me. The power sounded similar to the stories I heard growing up from Grandpa about the arts. He had been through the war, and the way he described what the arts casters on both sides could do seemed similar to how this merchant was talking about this girl. Therese tilted her head, looking at Sven. The merchant was quite enamored with the powers the girl wielded. He said that she was able to take stone and meld it like putty. Imagine that. Stonemasons would be out of work. Though, if you ask me, I think I'd rather be like the arts casters that could throw and wield fire. There would be so many cool tricks you could do with it. I could go around and put on a wild show. It'd be really neat. I bet it would be, dear, Therese said, nodding, though the look in her eyes said that Sven wasn't creative or skilled enough to be a stage performer. Did the merchant say where this arts caster was? Aurelia asked. Oh, he said the girl lived in Hafnafar, Sven said, though I thought people didn't live there anymore. Live there anymore? Therese asked. She reached out a hand and placed it on Sven's knee. I've heard the place is abandoned. Just a bunch of empty homes, he said, looking to his wife. Thanks, Sven, Bridgett said. Sure, Sven said with another yawn. We'll be on our way. Didn't mean to intrude, Aurelia said. Not at all. You're welcome whenever, Therese said, though I'm curious why you ask. Well, other than making sure Grandma wasn't... Bridgett paused. Seeing things. Therese nodded, easily picking up the implication. Oh, Therese said. I haven't told everyone about this, but now is as good a time as any. Since you'll be out and about, please let me know if you see any strange creatures or find a remarkable tale of some legendary monster. Okay, sure, Bridgett said. I'm making a guide of the local stories focusing on the legendary, mystical, and hidden creatures of Velessar and the surrounding area, Therese said. That's neat. I'll be sure to keep my eyes and ears open, Bridgett said. Did you add Tormod's? Aurelia started. Dragons? And who could forget his favorite, Therese said. Ghost whales. Any time anyone mentions them, he recounts the entire story. The wind took us out into the northern sea, Aurelia started. We've heard this one, Tormod, Bridgett grinned. Yes, you've heard this one before, Bridgett, but I'm not sure if everyone else here has, Aurelia said, her voice leaning into an imitation of the sailor's roughness. Bridgett laughed, and Therese joined in. They had all heard the same start and response several times. At this rate, the compendium might as well be named Tormod's Tales for all the material he's contributed, Therese said. We'll let you know, Bridgett said. Perhaps we'll find some undiscovered creature that hides in the deep woods, or stumble upon a whole roost of dragons. That'll make Tormod jealous. It sure would, Therese said, laughing. Good night, Therese, Bridgett said, moving over to give her a hug. Good night, Bridgett, Therese said, returning the embrace. They left the farmer's house and headed back to the village. Is it just me? Bridgett started. Or is it odd that only a few people noticed the merchant? Aurelia said. Very odd. Could someone be playing with us? Bridgett asked. Aurelia's expression stayed steady in the firelight of the new torch she had made. The village should be safe with Caden and Goodmander here if something comes up. Bridgett tilted her head. What? Oh, if someone's trying to lure her or us out. You have enemies you haven't told me about, Bridgett said lightly. It comes with the job, Aurelia said. They reached the longhouse in quiet, and Aurelia glided off towards her room. Bridgett entered the dining room of the longhouse to find her grandma asleep in her rocker and Jay sitting alongside her, reading an old book. Jay? Bridgett said. He looked up. Almost asleep yourself. She fell asleep almost as soon as you two left, Jay said. Do you want me to try and wake her up so we can walk her to bed? No, that's fine. I'll sleep out here tonight. You sure? I could take a shift out here. It's fine. I'm sure that book can wait. Bridgett looked at it. The book was the small manual on how to use the arts that she had found as a small child poking around one day. I still don't get why Jay has suddenly gotten so interested in it. You able to use the arts yet? No, Jay said. It's like what you and Hilda say. Only a few people can use it. Still, it's interesting. I didn't know that there was a motion involved in casting the arts. Bridgett nodded. Jay stood up with a lazy stretch. Good night, Bridgett. Night. She watched him leave before bringing out her blankets and arranging them on the ground, only a little ways away from her sleeping grandma. One more thing. Bridgett brought out a small bell that Sven had let them borrow and wrapped the string around Grandma's wrist. There, your little chime that lets me know if you try to sneak off in the middle of the night. Bridgett moved away from her sleeping grandma and settled in. The dim fire continued to crackle lightly. That was the prologue and chapter 1 of book 3 of the Velessar Saga. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more, get some more sneak previews and behind the scenes, click the subscribe or follow or what have you, and I'll catch you on the next one.